In South Asia, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, has said his government will respond to the airstrikes by India in Pakistan that killed over 30 people. India has said it was responding to an attack on people in India in Kashmir a week ago. It claims that was carried out with help from the Pakistani military. The two countries have contested control for what is currently the Indian state of Kashmir since they were split into two countries at the end of the colonial era by Britain. Sanusha Naidu is at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, good morning. Pakistan is promising to take action against India. What options does it have? Could it use military action? Could it maybe find a way to de-escalate the situation?
Good morning, Stephen, and good morning to the viewers. I think this is really now the next kind of escalation from what we've seen over the last couple of days, where the Indian army had gone in with a precision offensive strategy. They basically went in and there were attacks on specific bases, terrorist bases that they claim that were within the proximity of where the attack took place in what they call Little Switzerland, in administered Kashmir, Indian administered Kashmir. And I think this is now again this question around this kind of push and pull dynamic that exists within that region, particularly around the contestation over Kashmir. And the impact of this in terms of what the Pakistani authorities have said is it could actually be not necessarily de-escalation, but it could actually be more internal instability. It could be the fact that what India has always claimed is that the Pakistani state, the authorities, the military, etc., the government has never been able to rein back these terrorist cells, these kinds of insurgency groups that have basically been sprouting within that geographical architecture and ecosystem within the region. And most of it that comes out of there, India has always alleged that it has been by the Pakistani government turning a blind eye to these insurgency groups emerging. So in a sense, this could actually then be another kind of escalation in terms of what these groups will be enabled to do if the allegations are true that the Pakistani government has actually provided some kind of issues or provided the kind of architecture for these groups to emerge and to continue their activities. I don't know what the Pakistani government may think as a kind of retaliation or a kind of response to the attacks that the Indian army had conducted in the last couple of days. But what the Indian government has also done is that they've called in their external partners into the Ministry of External Affairs and saying that this is not an escalation. This is a once-off kind of attack. We went in there because we needed a response. And of course, if you listen to the Indian defense minister, he's actually kind of saying, well, this is something that was provoked in a sense. So I think that the challenge for the Pakistani side is whether or not this gets escalated at the UN level, whether it gets at that level where they want to actually bring it, because there's always been a very, it's been a very precarious, it's been a very sensitive issue in the context of the UN. And more importantly, I think that what the Indian government has done is they've got the UN to make to bring some of these groups that they claim are terrorist insurgency groups that have basically been able to manifest under the eye of the Pakistani government, who has turned a blind eye to this, is that they brought them onto the terrorist list of the UN agency and the UN architecture. So what the Pakistani government is going to do now is going to be very interesting, is because it could end up in also becoming much more outside of state sovereignty issues as well.
I was making the point that in the past we've seen very tense situations between India and Pakistan. They seem to escalate, and then somehow that tension seems to abate. Could that happen here too?
Well, I think looking at past experiences, yes, that is the kind of feeling that they come to a crescendo, and then of course it gets very kind of intense. It becomes very kind of hot-headed in a sense, and then they kind of dissipate. I'm not so sure if this time around we're going to see that kind of reaction. We're going to see that kind of cooling down, and then of course moving back to their line of control in terms of what's happening with regard to Kashmir, Jammu, and of course the whole issue around Indian administered Kashmir, and of course the line of control and so forth. But I think this time around there seems to be, from my reading, and I could be reading it incorrectly, is that there's a genuine kind of pushback as well within the Indian context, from within India, behind the borders, in terms of this reaction, that this was an attack on innocent lives in this tourist place, that it was somehow unprovoked, that there was a need now to show the stamina. And even within the context of watching, the equivalent of the Premier Football League, which is the Indian Premier League happening, the Indian T20 cricket, you're seeing that coming out there as well. So in terms of the mood, the national consensus, the kind of internal dynamics, I think there's a genuine sense from what I'm reading is that there's probably now a need to, for definitely from the Indian side, to say we're not going to basically just kind of let this manifest and then just let it kind of fluster away in the way that it has been. The other issue here is whether or not, and we're seeing the kind of international concern as well, the diplomacy, not necessarily diplomacy in the sense that we understand coming together and trying to negotiate, but rather where India has now brought in international partners and trying to appease that this is not going to probably escalate into another kind of conflict within a conflict in terms of what's happening. But again, I think we've seen too many of these kinds of internal dynamics then erupting and getting into a kind of fully blown conflict. And I think this time around, it's going to be difficult because I think India wants to see some kind of retribution, some kind of pushing back on this. And they need to basically want to also exercise their ability of what they see as a serious blight and a serious issue dating back to independence. And of course, the fact that Kashmir is at the center of that whole independence of how Pakistan was created out of India in terms of territorial sovereignty.